If someone tells me that I've hurt their feelings, I say, well, I'm still waiting to hear what your point is.
Right.
I'm very depressed how in this country you can be told, that's offensive, as if those two words constitute an argument or a comment. Not to me, they don't. And I'm not running for anything, so I don't have to pretend to like people when I don't.
Right.
I wasn't maltreated by any faith or any church or anything like that. I didn't have a reverse Damascus of losing my faith. What I did was more like discover that I didn't believe. I think probably there are a fair number of people here who know what I'm talking about, had the same experience. The way I discovered it was this. I had a nice teacher called Mrs. Watts, an old trout, when I was at a boys' school in Devonshire. I must have been about 10. But she was also our scripture teacher. I used to enjoy scripture lessons because it was my first, I didn't know this, but it was my first work as a literary critic. I was going through, and I could never get over it. I started to notice more and more discrepancies and absurdities. And you know how it is, you can't be a little bit heretical. That's partly why I favor compulsory religious instruction in schools. Because I know of no other way to guarantee the steady mass production of atheism among the young. Friedrich Nietzsche famously said that God was dead, and Sigmund Freud can be rendered as having said that God was dad. And I think both of them are probably right. The concept of God is like everything else in our vocabulary, man-made. It's an invention of human beings. Unless you take the view that God made us, in which case it'd be a lot to explain. Why did we in that case make so many gods? It does seem to be very much more probable that men and women made many gods than that any one God made all men and women and the rest of creation. And as well as being man-made, it's fear-made. It is the unexpressed or partially expressed wish for a protector, a parent, someone who will never desert you, someone who will do in a way you're thinking for you, especially on questions of moral philosophy. At its best, it's that. It's a wish to be loved more than you probably deserve. And at its worst, it's the underdeveloped part of the human psyche that leads to totalitarianism, that wants to worship and that wants a boss, that wants a celestial dictatorship. And that's the bit that's now threatening to destroy our secular civilization. And so you're quite right to start where you do. It used to be believed, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other, but it used to be that. There was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time. So believing that there might be a cause or a mover or a creator is one thing, but believing that there is a supervising, intervening entity who cares who wins the war, who cares who you sleep with and in what way, who cares what you eat and on what day, and in other words, who makes you the center of the whole cosmos, is another thing altogether. So people who say, I believe in God, I'm a deist, have all their work in front of them before they can say that they are really religious.
Are you prepared to be a deist?
No.
No divine mover, even at the, whatever, the origin?
There's nothing in the natural, in the cosmic order, or that's the macro level, or the micro level, that's to say the constituent of our own DNA and the things that we have in common with the other animals, and indeed other forms of life like plants, that isn't susceptible to a much better explanation.
Well, here's...
as the great physicist Laplace said when he demonstrated his working model, his orrery as it's called, of the solar system to the emperor, and Napoleon said, well, I see there's no God in this system, and Laplace said, well, Your Majesty, it works without that assumption. Every second that we're speaking, a star the size of our sun or bigger goes out, blows up or goes out. That's been the case every single second since the first moment of the Big Bang. It's a lot. That'll be a lot of suns going out as we speak. And there's a lot of annihilation, isn't it? There's a lot of destruction. It's a rather what you might call almost a wasteful scale. It does have the positive outcome, though, that we are all constituted of those materials. We are made of stardust. Now, I find that a rather more majestic and wonderful and even beautiful idea than, say, the idea of the burning bush. A bit more impressive. Gives you more to think about.
Are they mutually exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive? Did God make you of stardust?
One has the virtue of being true and provable and studyable, which the other doesn't. And I do think that the verifiability of something is a virtue of
Are we
kind.
simply material?
Yes. We don't have bodies, we are bodies. All of this massive Big Bang cosmological churning and destruction and annihilation, which is paralleled, by the way, on our own Earth, where 99% of all species that have ever been on the planet have already gone extinct, leaving no descendants. All of this could be part of a plan. There is no way an atheist can prove it's not. But it's some plan, isn't it? With mass destruction, pitiless extermination, annihilation going on all the time, and all of this set in motion on a scale that's absolutely beyond our imagination, in order that the Pope can tell people not to jerk off. At all. It's much more exciting, it's much more interesting, it's much more rewarding, it's verifiable, and yes, there are elements of, I was trying to say, the miraculous, the awe-inspiring, the tragic, the majestic in this, that there simply are not in the incantations of Genesis, where the supposed authors claim to know the divinity, the creator, on personal terms. This is nonsense, it's for children.
Whereas to tell a child, you go to this church, which means you'll go to heaven, but your little playmates don't go to that church, and therefore will go to hell, seems to me to be an unpleasant thing to be saying. But
yes, that is.
Maybe I'm in a minority then.
That could be an unpleasant thing, but how do you develop?
Actually, an evil thing to be saying.
Let's call it evil, Christopher.
And something that only a religious person would dream of saying.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion. I don't believe in the rest of it, don't believe in the prophets, don't believe in the mountaintop, don't believe in the revelation. Well, nor should you. But how dare you suggest to us that we couldn't teach our children self-restraint and respect for others and the golden rule? How dare you?
Michael wanted to do this sitting down, but it's the old demagogue in me. I need the pulpit, I need the podium, and if I can't be erect, at least I can be upright. When I debate with Jews and Muslims and Christians, I very often I say, well, do you really believe there was a virgin birth? Do you really believe in a Genesis creation? Do you really believe in bodily resurrection? And I get a sort of Monty Python reply. Well, there's a little bit of metaphorical, really. You hear it very often said by people of a vague faith that, well, it may not be the case that religion is metaphysically true. Its figures and its stories may be legendary or dwell on the edge of myth, prehistoric. Its truth claims may be laughable. We have better explanations for the origins both of our cosmos and our species now, so much better so, in fact, that had they been available to begin with, religion would never have taken root. No one would now go back to the stage when we didn't have any real philosophy. We only had mythology. When we thought we lived on a flat planet, or when we thought that our planet was circulated by the sun instead of the other way around, when we didn't know there were microorganisms as part of creation and that they were more powerful than us and had dominion over us rather than we them, when we were fearful, the infancy of our species, we wouldn't have taken up theism if we'd known now what we did then. But allow for all that, you still have to credit religion with being the source of ethics and morals. Where would we get these from if it weren't for faith? I think if, in the time I've got, I think that's the position I most want to undermine. I further think that it undermines us in our most essential integrity. It dissolves our obligation to live and witness in truth. Which of us would say that we would believe something because it might cheer us up, or tell our children that something was true
because it might dry their eyes. Which of us indulges in wishful thinking, who really cares about the pursuit of truth at all costs and at all hazards? Can it not be said, do you not in fact hear it said repeatedly about religion and by the religious themselves that, well, it may not be really true, the stories may be fairy tales, the history may be dubious, but it provides consolation? Can anyone hear themselves saying this or have it said of them without some kind of embarrassment, without the concession that thinking here is directly wishful? That yes, it would be nice if you could throw your sins and your responsibilities on someone else and have them dissolved, but it's not true, and it's not morally sound. Christianity used to say it can explain everything. All you need to know is there's an all-powerful, all-loving, all-intervening, all-knowing, omniscient God. Okay, well then wait, wouldn't DNA explain more? Well that only shows that God's even cleverer than we thought. So it's an infinitely expanding tautology. It is true to say that religion, as Stephen Jay Gould said, that religion and science belong to non-overlapping magisteria. I think these magisteria are in many ways incompatible and in many ways irreconcilable, but it is no more true to say that the existence of the complexity of DNA shows that God was more ingenious than we thought, than it is to say that it necessarily shows by its self-revealing ingenuity that we don't need the hypothesis of God. Both of these positions would be, in my opinion, somewhat reductionist, though I would have to say that I think the second one is more persuasive and more elegant.
Now, Gould is wrong.
Will that do?
Christians or religious people, religion is trying to find out how the universe began, and so is science. They're not.
No, religion says it does know, excuse me.
No, it's trying to find
Religion is not a process of scientific inquiry. Religion is an affirmation of faith. It says it already knows.
I am a religious person, Christopher, and I am using evidence to try and point out that the universe exploded into being out of nothing.
And you have scientific evidence for the view that an intervention will occur to prevent the implosion and
no, forget that. Let's start at the beginning.
I can't forget it.
Let's start at the beginning. That's for debate 2.
It's the only thing you've said all evening that I'm going to remember.
Gentlemen.
That's for debate 2.
No. I mean, don't say, look, do yourself and your faith the honor of saying it's faith. Don't say it's science-based.
The argument would be...
You won't get away with it.
Look, the argument would be, Christopher, is that if the universe exploded into being out of nothing, then miracles are possible because the greatest miracle of all has already occurred. The question is, have miracles occurred in the first century? That requires another debate whereby we have to look at the historical evidence and see. And if it is true that that Jesus really did come and say and do the things that the New Testament writer said he did, then whatever he teaches is true, because if he rose from the dead, he was God. If he taught that there will be an intervention, then there will be. That's the argument. I don't have time to support it.
A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural order.
No, an intervention.
You can't say of the Big Bang, which is the foundation of the natural order, that it's a suspension of what it starts. You may not do that. However, if you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake? And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all. But yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
You don't need regular events to know whether or not something happened. Singular events happen all the time. This debate will never happen again, yet you're here to witness it. I'm just going to repose my trust in the audience here. There's an obvious difference between a singularity and a miracle. And I think it would be embarrassing to try and explain it. It would be patronizing to try and explain it. Apart from that, Abraham's most famous for saying, if God wants me to kill my boy, of course I will. And the only difference between the monotheisms is that some say it was Isaac and some say it was Ishmael. I don't particularly care. But there are annual festivities on the part of the faithful to say, we wish we too were capable of such faith. And we want to beat our breasts in sympathy with those who are. Why do the Jewish people blow the ram's horn, the shofar? Because the shofar symbolizes the ram who is sacrificed instead. The blood sacrifice is the main thing, and there has to be a child involved. This seems to me to be disgraceful, and what's taken for granted that goes with it, because it was practiced on Isaac too in the form of a covenant and imitated by others, the genital mutilation of the young, to seal the pact with God, to say, nothing matters to me, not the life or health or bodily integrity of my child, never mind that. What has to be proved is, without God I am nothing. I'll kill for it, and I'm not just willing to say that, I'm willing to prove it, and I'm willing to use my children's bodies as the theater of this enactment of faith. Well, civilization, in my submission, ladies and gentlemen, begins where that evil nonsense leaves off. And we have to advance the time when more and more people will be able to civilize themselves by outgrowing religion and leaving this awful nonsense behind. And with that, did you really say not imposed? What if you reject this offer? What have you been told for centuries by Christians? If you reject this offer that took place by means of a torture to death of a human being that you didn't want and should have prevented, if you could. What if you reject the offer? Say, if you accept it, you can have eternal life and your sins are forgiven. Oh, great. What a horrible way to abolish your own responsibility and get your own bliss. I don't want it. Oh, you don't? Well, then you can go to hell. This is not imposed. This hasn't been preached to children by gruesome elderly virgins backed by force for centuries. This hasn't poisoned whole societies. My children must be taught this stuff. No, sir. No, ma'am. No day. No way. No shape. No form. You keep your illusion private.
I mean, if Sam and I were to form a corps of people to go around religious hospitals, which is what happens in reverse, and say to people who are lying in pain, say, did you say you were Catholic? Yes. Well, look, you may only have a few days left, but you don't have to live them as a serf, you know. Just recognize that that was all bullshit, that the priests have been cheating you. And I guarantee you'll feel better. I don't think that would be very ethical.
Okay, but
I think it would be something of a breach of taste. But if it's in the name of if it's in the name of God, it has a social license. Well, fuck that, is what I say.
Well, you know why atheists are to be pitied, don't you? They have no one to talk to when receiving a blowjob. So that if I'm asked, do I wish that religion would die out of the world, I sort of reply, no, I wouldn't have anyone to argue with. I mean, it is, after all, it is the original argument. Where religion ends, philosophy begins, just as where phony cosmological myths end,
physics begins, or you have to know what the origins of the argument are. And religion is our first and worst attempt to find out what's going on. We only bother with it because it was here first. It grabbed the territory of explanation, because we are pattern-seeking mammals. We need to look for patterns and for logic, and we prefer, even in times like this, many people will prefer a conspiracy explanation to no theory at all, because they need to have some explanation. Well, religion comes from the time when we didn't know there was a germ theory to explain disease. So it was plague, it was God's will, and a curse. Didn't know we lived on a round planet. Didn't know there were round celestial bodies. Didn't know that our DNA makes us kin with other animals and indeed plants. Now it's been rather painstakingly and elaborately demonstrated, to the satisfaction of most people, I don't want to just use arguments from authority, but it's not very much contested anymore, that we are not designed as creatures, but that we evolved by a rather laborious combination of random mutation and natural selection into the species that we are today. It is, of course, open to the faithful to say that all this was, now that they come to know it, now that it becomes available to everybody, now that they think about it, and now that they've stopped opposing it or trying to ban it, then they can say, actually, on second thought, the evolution was all part of the design. Well, as you will recognize, ladies and gentlemen, there are some arguments I can't be expected to refute or rebut, because there's no way around that argument. I mean, if everything, including evolution, which isn't a design, is nonetheless part of a divine design, then all the advantage goes to the person who's willing to believe that. That cannot be disproved. But it does seem to me a very poor and very weak argument, because the test of a good argument is that it is falsifiable, not that it's unfalsifiable. So this tactic, or this style of argument, which we've had some evidence of this evening, I would rebaptize, or might I dare say I would rechristen it, as retrospective evidentialism. In other words, everything can, in due time, if you have enough faith, be made to fit. And you too are all quite free to believe that a sentient creator deliberately, consciously put himself, a being, put himself or herself or itself to the trouble of going through huge epochs of birth and death of species over eons of time, in which 99%, in the course of which at least 99.9% of all species, all life forms ever to have appeared on Earth have become extinct. You have to be able to imagine that all this mass extinction and death and randomness is the will of a being. You are absolutely free to believe that if you wish. And all of this should happen so that one very imperfect race of evolved primates should have the opportunity to become Christians, or to turn up at this gym tonight. That all of that was done with us in view. It's a curious kind of solipsism. It's a curious kind of self-centeredness. I was always brought up to believe that Christians were modest and humble and comported themselves with due humility. And there's a certain arrogance to this assumption that all of this extraordinary development was all about us. And we were the intended and designed result, and everything else was in the discard. The tremendous wastefulness of it, the tremendous cruelty of it, the tremendous caprice of it, the tremendous tinkering and incompetence of it, never mind. At least we're here, and we can be people of faith. It doesn't work for me, I have to simply say that, and I think there may be questions of psychology involved in this as well. Believe it if you can. I can't stop you. Believe it if you like. You're welcome. It's obviously impossible, as I said before, to disprove, and it equally obviously helps you to believe it if, as we all are, you're in the happy position of knowing the outcome. In other words, we are here, but there's a fallacy lurking in there somewhere too. Is there not? If there was an entity that was responsible for the beginning of the cosmos, and that also happened to be busily engineering the very laborious production of life on our little planet, it still wouldn't prove that this entity cared about us, answered prayers, cared what church we went to, or whether we went to one at all, cared who we had sex with, or in what position, or by what means, cared what we ate, or on what day, cared whether we lived or died. There's no reason at all why this entity isn't completely indifferent to us. You cannot get
from deism to theism except by a series of extraordinarily generous to yourself assumptions. The deist has all his work still ahead of him to show that it leads to revelation, to redemption, to salvation, or to suspensions of the natural order, in which hitherto you've been putting all your faith, all your evidence is on scientific and natural evidence, or why not, for a change of pace and a change of taste, say yes, but sometimes this same natural order, which is so miraculous in observation, no question about it, is so impressive in its favoring the conditions for life in some ways, but it's randomly suspended when miracles are required. So with caprice and contempt, these laws turn out not to be so important after all, as long as the truth of religion can be proved by their being rendered inoperative. This is having it both ways in the most promiscuous and exorbitant manner in my submission. Because we don't know what the scientific origins of the Big Bang are, which Father Lemaitre didn't know any more than I do, or Einstein did. There must be a supernatural explanation. That isn't logical at all. And if there was a supernatural progenitor, where did that supernatural progenitor come from? Who created that? So you get nothing out of it but an infinite regression, and I think the meanest application to science is more satisfying than that, and much more likely to yield an answer that you can at least argue about. Whereas if you're simply told you have a creator and he has a plan for you, it explains nothing, and it has reactionary implications, because it suggests there are people who can't just tell you what to do. There are plenty of those as it is. People who say, God tells me to tell you what to do. And that's slavery. We're all very grateful to Thomas Huxley, but I can't thank him for his coinage of the term agnostic, which was his bolt whole term. Again, to try for a compromise where I don't really think the basis for it exists. So you don't have to say you don't believe in God. You can simply say not all the returns, not all the evidence are or is in yet, so I won't declare. Now, I think that that's wrong twice. One, you're not saying that you cannot prove that there is no God. No atheist has ever said that. But the atheist view is there's absolutely no reason ever been advanced by another primate to believe that there is one. And when you've got that far, you really ought to say there isn't, it seems to me. Not that for that reason I'm not sure. And it's completely not on all fours with the other position, which is evidence has nothing to do with it. Faith is much more important. Not only should you have faith, but you'll be saved if you do. Now, that's not, I don't know. It's not, there might be. It's not, unless you do it like Pascal and say it's a vulgar bet, it's a wager, what have you got to lose? Which I think is morally creepy, as well as evidentially unsound, because if some huckster comes to me and says, look, he may not be there, but if he is, you've got everything to gain by saying you believe in him, even if you don't really, I'll say, well, then I don't think much of your God, because if there is such a person, and I spend my life arguing that there isn't, and I do my best, when I check out, which I sure will, if I find that I'm mistaken and I'm confronted with the guy, I would hope he would be able to say, I at least admire your honesty. Now, either a priori you believe in a creation story, or you do not. I am, I'll just have to say it, I'm one of those people who's meant by Pascal when he says he's writing his pensée to those who are so made that they cannot believe. You have to include me in that. I don't believe in a creator. I don't believe I'm supervised. I don't believe that a being set the universe in motion. And I don't know.
Then how is it set in motion?
And I don't know any physicist who does, and I'm not a physicist
I quoted
myself.
a lot of them already.
If you and I had been having this argument in the 18th century, you'd be saying that I should recognize Jesus as my personal savior, and you wouldn't have heard of the Big Bang.
I would have heard of...
And you don't convince me...
What does that have to do with the question?
I'll just have to say this. You don't convince me that there's any connection between your faith and any scientific observation.
There's a difference between proof and persuasion.
I'm not here to debate physics, and I'm not competent to do so.
Okay, so you don't have an answer for that, how the universe came into existence out of nothing?
No more than you do, no.
Let's move to a second question.
If all space, all matter, and all time had a beginning, the cause must be outside of space, matter, and time.
You don't know how it happened, and neither do I. Okay? You're not going to convince me, and I don't think you've convinced anyone in the audience, that you know very much more about the origins of the universe than they did.
It's an implication.
And that would be true even if you knew more about it than I do,
now.
which you may well.
Final question.
Is it not the case that the spread of Christianity, about which you spoke so warmly and affectingly in your opening remarks, attributing it to the innate truth of the Bible story, was spread by that means, or because the Emperor Constantine decided to make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire? Which, in your view, contributed more to the spread of the faith?
The Holy Spirit.
I rest my case.
Thank you.
I imagine that it was held in common between us and this audience that it isn't possible to decide these matters finally, that no one has ever produced an ontological proof of God that is completely satisfying, nor a disproof that is completely satisfying. However, the burden surely is a little more heavy on those who say, I know that there is a God, and not only am I a deist, I'm a theist, I know what he wants. In fact, I know who his son is. In fact, I'm on sort of personal terms with the guy in ways that are not evident to you. That demands a slightly higher standard of proof, and to say you didn't come up to that scratch, my dear, I'm sorry, is to say the least of it. Okay?
I, for one, will take it as extremely insulting if any person of faith makes the assumption that their faith gives them a moral edge on me. I want to hear a lot more apologizing from the faith-based communities for the evil that they've done before they even start clearing their throats and telling me I wouldn't know right from wrong without their permission. I'm sorry, I won't be, can't be spoken to in that tone of voice, and nor should any of you.
Thousands of people dying from earthquakes can't be called God's punishment. Why is it that a person being saved from under the rubble days later is almost invariably called a miracle?
It's probably the stupidest thing the human race does, is to look for patterns in this way and say, when a baby falls out of a high-rise building and bounces on the grass below, that must be God. And when millions of children die every day for the lack of pure drinking water and just die of diarrhea in a banal manner, that's because God moves in a mysterious way or isn't involved at all. So I think we're off to a racing start, ladies and gentlemen. On the key question, anyway.
Natural disasters happen, and an omnipotent God lets them happen, for those of us who believe in God.
Several leaders of the Christian church, as you know, said about the last tsunami that it was a punishment. In Britain, several of them said it was a punishment for homosexuality. It used to be said that earthquakes were a punishment for sodomy. Since we're doing sodomy in the Lash, I thought I might as well bring this up. Oddly enough, the San Francisco earthquake only hit when San Francisco was famous for other things. When New Orleans got flooded, the only bits that didn't get flooded were the red light district. Okay? So anyone who says they know God's mind in this had better not mind looking a bit foolish. Or, which you obviously don't, or had better say, take responsibility and say, yes, by letting it happen, God must in some way wish it to.
Christopher, it's very impressive to me.
Okay, good.
It's very often the first thing. When we debate with Catholics, they always change the subject to charity right away. With Jews, it's usually a little later.
You just said that they...
And with Muslims, it's
at the
all the time. Because what else can they don't want to defend their faith.
But you just said the opposite. You just said that if you didn't believe, you wouldn't do it.
They don't want to defend their faith. They don't want to say, they feel uneasy talking about redemption, salvation, all this kind of thing. But look at the good work we've done. If you talk to the Mormons, they'll say, you may not think much of Joseph Smith. And I say, you got that right. Say, but, boy, you should see our missionaries in Peru.
The government will do the work if religion does not.
Excuse me,
government?
What has this got to do with the existence of God or the validity of religious claims? It has nothing to do with it.
Social
which
utility.
is why it's always introduced as a time-wasting tactic.
Wait. No, don't applaud that.
Nothing to do with it.
He just...
In Christianity, you have the idea, for example, that morality is intentional. If you've contemplated the sin, Christ says, in a sense, you've committed it.
Thought crime.
One second, the mullah
Thought
doesn't...
crime. Totalitarianism again. Thought crime.
whether it is or not.
We know what you're thinking, and we can punish you for it. Totalitarianism defined. Tyranny defined. Thought crime.
You have all these moral issues with Christianity. Where do you get your morality from if we're just molecules in motion? What is morality?
Who says we're just molecules in motion?
You're a materialist. What else could you be?
We're fairly highly evolved primates who have an innate need for and recognition of human solidarity. You can call that morals if you wish. I think I would. It's only good people, but a lot of people, they say made in the image of God, are born as psychopaths and sociopaths. They don't feel this need. Indeed, they enjoy violating it. I don't know where that fits in, particularly to God's plan, but it's been put like this. Left to themselves, good people will do as much good as they can. Wicked people will do as much ill as they can. If you want to get a good person to do an evil thing, you make them religious. There is, in theory, nothing to choose between any kind of religion or any version of it. My way of phrasing it is that they're all, in their separate and wonderful ways, equal glimpses of the same untruth. And therefore it needn't particularly matter whether you're a Quaker or, say, a Mormon or a Shia Muslim or a worshipper of the Emperor of Japan, because the illusion is the same in each case, and the demand that you surrender what is, in my view, your most precious faculty, that's your ability to reason, and your ability to practice self-doubt and self-criticism and skepticism. In other words, that you will take something on faith and expect to be praised and respected for doing so. We do it all the time ourselves. You hear it all the time on television and in American politics. People are praised for having faith, just for having it. Doesn't matter what it is. In fact, President Eisenhower said, it's really important to have a religious belief, and I don't mind what it is either. Because just the ability to surrender your mind is enough. Well, I know that I'm going to have to put up with a lot of this, and I know that it is innate in us. That's true. It's not something that can be extirpated or that should be extirpated, as long as our prefrontal lobes are too small and our adrenaline glands are slightly too big. And we show all the other signs of what Darwin calls the lowly stamp of our origin. We are half a chromosome away from chimpanzees, and our religious beliefs show that. Religion is what you would expect if it had been made up by such a tribe. What I do think we can contest, and must contest, is the idea that this irrationality needs to be respected or revered. That's asking too bloody much, if you ask me.
I think for two reasons. One is religion is the most interesting subject of all. I mean, if you have a friend or an acquaintance, you know an awful lot about them, depending on whether they attribute their presence in the studio to the laws of biology, the laws of nature, the laws of evolution by natural selection, or whether they think that they're here because of a divine plan. It's a big difference, philosophically, morally. And so going into this means you raise all the most interesting, all the most fundamental, basic questions. That's the first thing. So it's never a boring discussion. And second, or it shouldn't be, and the second is that at the moment, if you open the newspaper and see how the parties of God are behaving around the world, everywhere from Russia to Iran to even certain parts of the United States where they think they ought to influence the education system, that people are, I think, becoming fed up with being pushed around by ordinary mammals who think that they are better than us because they have God on their side. Enough with this. It's very insulting, it's very threatening, it's very stupid.
Now, for there to be a fair test about this, you'd have to do the following. And no one I've ever debated with has even tried it. So you be the first. You find me a state or a society that threw off theocracy and threw off religion and said we adopt the teachings of Lucretius and Democritus and Galileo and Spinoza and Darwin and Russell and Jefferson and Thomas Paine. And we make those what we teach our children. We make that scientific and rational humanism our teaching. And you find me the state that did that and fell into tyranny and slavery and famine and torture, and then we'll be on a level playing field. As it is, all you've done is show that the idea of worship and the idea of credulity and the idea of servility and slavery to religion is a bad idea in the first place.
But none of the czars and none of the Chinese kings none of this.
By the way, the Russian Orthodox Church always stayed with Stalin, always stayed with Stalin.
But they never killed 30% of their population.
Who didn't?
The Russians never killed 30% of the population before the communists took over, 20 or 30%. No Tsar ever did that. No Christian Tsar ever did any killing on anyone.
Well, no, excuse me, they started the First World War. They started the pogroms. They brought the protocols of the Elders of Zion that was imported by Tsarist secret policemen to National Socialist Christian gangsters in Europe. How much do you think the export of Russian Orthodox anti-Semitism cost us in point of lives and war? And have you ever counted up what happened to the wars, in the wars that Tsarism started and carried on, and the persecutions, and the famines, and the tortures, and the starvation, and the people who just died of neglect? Come on. You want to do this accounting? I'm here. I'm really here for you. Or what the Serbian Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox have just done in the Balkans. The most recent genocide we've seen in Europe, entirely done by Russian and Serbian Orthodox fascists and Catholic Croatian Ustasha, grinding a whole part of civilized Europe into nothingness and bloodshed for their filthy, stupid medieval quarrels. How dare you say that any secularist, we who've opposed this kind of barbaric stuff, are on all fours with these creeps? You should take it back. You owe me an apology. You lose, Boychik. You lose, Boychik.
Please. Hey, civility. Civility.
Civility is overrated.
Well, are you assuming that we have free will? Are you assuming that we have free will?
The view I take about free will is that of course we have free will because we have no choice but to have it. I was, and to some extent, I still to some extent am a dialectical materialist, and I also think there are some ironies in the universe as well as in history. But to say, of course we have free will, the boss says we've got it, is to make a mockery of the whole concept. And it's also to invite the question, what kind of tyranny is this that you want? You want an all-supervising, all-deciding person. I ask you first, what sources of information do you have about this person's existence that I don't have, that are denied to me? I'd like to know. And second, why do you want it? Why do you want to arrive at a terminus of unfreedom where there is a celestial authority upon whom all things depend and from which all things flow? Why do you want that, and how on earth do you know that there's any case to be made for its existence?
Being proved repeatedly and over again right when other people were wrong. That does a lot for me. But raising the sights just a fraction, I'd say that to me that what matters most is the pursuit of happiness, in the words of our greatest founding father, and the pursuit of liberty, freedom, and that these things are incompatible, completely incompatible with the worship of an unalterable celestial dictator. Someone who can watch you while you sleep and convict you of thought crime, and whose rule cannot be challenged, and who's the big brother whose eternal reign may not be disputed. That makes the concept of the pursuit of freedom and happiness completely negative, negates it. So one of the things I live for is to return a stout and joyful non-serviam to this dictator, who I'm pleased to find doesn't really exist, but is instead a creation of those who want to install a theocracy in the real life where I can participate, and I'm not going to give them an inch. The second thing I live for is, if not exactly passing on my genes, taking part in activities that might allow those genes to be passed on. And not scorning the three delightful children who are everything to me and who are my only chance of even a glimpse of a second life, let alone an immortal one. And I'll tell you something, if I was told to sacrifice them to prove my devotion to God, if I was told to do what all monotheists are told to do, and admire the man who said, yes, I'll gut my kid to show my love of God, I'd say, no, fuck you. Those who ask confessions from other people should be willing to make oneself. I am obsessed with sex. Ever since I discovered that my God-given male member was going to give me no peace, I decided to give it no rest in return. Seems fair to me.
But I'm obviously in the category of straight white male person.
Right.
It's when people start talking about power, about the power that this gives me, that I begin to wonder if slightly too much of a compliment isn't being paid. Rather as when some women talk about the penis as a sort of mighty engine or cruise missile or something, you think, well, I wonder where they get this idea. But I do think there is, and the reason why I will speak for what I think many male, straight, white types do fear, is that there must be some relationship between this empowerment talk that they keep hearing and potency. There's got to be some hidden subliminal connection, some latent connection. There's got to be, they think. So they back off a bit.
So as women began to say, someone said that this whole thing has two parts. One, women are saying, I'm going to enjoy sex, and I'm going to enjoy sex on my own terms, and I'm going to make demands. And you're saying when that takes place, therefore, it affects, it goes to the heart of male performance and male potency and those kinds of issues.
The temptation is then going to be that of self-pity. You'll say, well, actually, I'm not all that powerful, and sometimes I don't feel all that potent.
Right.
And the male organ, for heaven's sake, is actually rather capricious, vulnerable, I'm making an animal rights point, basically. I mean, we are an animal species.
Right.
We are programmed to reproduce. Men particularly are programmed to inseminate. They can't, so to speak, help it. That's just as well, really, because without testosterone and erections and other things of the sort, none of us would be here. Now, I think that, rather as you pulled me up by saying there was feminism before the 60s, I'm quite ready to acknowledge, I think that point was understood before Camille Paglia.
Well, but
Wouldn't you agree to that?
Okay.
See, I think objectification is an absolutely stupid word, and I'm fed up with it. I think it's being overused like empowerment. When I look at that picture, if you want to hold it up again,
I
don't regard Miss Crawford. What I see there is not just a sexual object, though undoubtedly she is an object. Everyone else is an object to everyone else.
Yeah.
But I also see a subject. She's a great subject. Sex is a great subject.
Right.
Women are, in male conversation, a tremendous subject. I'm told the same is true the other way around.
Well, she did make a point about
in other words, if people talk a bit less about themselves and how the personal is political and the whole area of contestation is all to do with their own psyche and their own needs and dreads and feelings, and a bit more about society and others, I think we might get on a lot better.
There is no question that for women the need or ability to be funny is tremendously less than it is among men. Nobody has been found to deny that. Alessandra doesn't even try to deny it. And she even at one point echoes what I think is my strongest point, namely that women don't need to be funny. That for most men, if they can't make women laugh, they are out of the evolutionary contest. They are never going to get laid. Most men are fantastically unattractive. What women see in them is mysterious to most men as well as most women. If you can't make them laugh, you don't have a chance. With women, there's no need to be rendering yourself attractive to men in that way. We already find you attractive, thanks. A salad of letters chosen by the magazine's correspondence editors criticizing me made me think I could write a sequel called How Some Women Apparently Can't Even Read, because where I had said, look, I'm not saying there are no female comedians, I'm not saying they can't do stand-up or a woman can't do it, you'd get a long, boring letter saying, I challenge Mr. Hitchens to a stand-up contest with this bull dyke I know in Portland, Oregon, who does a great stand-up routine. Well, that's not getting the point, is it, dear? And it's trying, I find sometimes, irritating, time-consuming, annoying when they don't listen. Intuitively, everybody thinks that a sense of humor or wit is a sign of intelligence. So it can be, if people aren't following you closely, that an accusation that one lacks a sense of humor or isn't funny, which are two different things, either, though, is an insult. Now, of course, this isn't true. It would be a waste of the male effort to be funny, which is much more highly evolved and much more evolutionarily self-selected, if women didn't have a sense of humor and couldn't be made to laugh. I won't try and do it for you on camera, but there's an attitude, the head thrown back and the mouth wide open and the horseshoe of lovely teeth and tongue on display and so forth, that is, well, it's a bit of a surrender. It's worth it for its own sake, and it's a simulacrum of something even more worth it. But she says, and I quote, By and large, however, stand-up comedy is tougher and meaner, and the women who do it play by men's rules. Well, that's exactly, in so many words, what I said. But now they're prettier and sexier, and they wear less and care less about the proprieties. So, what has been the achievement of my essay? It's been to make sexier women try harder to amuse me. Well, that was my whole plan to start off with.
One of the reasons why so many women are not describing themselves as feminists these days is because it's not relevant to them, because the struggle for existence for women at the moment is quite grim, and it's usually centered on the very important fact of bringing up children. And not only can you not get hold of a kid without a man, but you have a very hard time bringing one up without a guy. And many of these women, I think, of the working class, if I can use another phrase that's hardly ever heard on TV, like clitoris and penis and so on.
Working class?
Working class. They often hear that. They think of feminism as something that maybe is bad-mouthing their brothers and their husbands and their fathers and other hard-working guys who they know and quite like.
This is another complaint.
But most men are pretty hopeless when newborn bundles arrive, and they're so incredibly impressed by how women appear to know what to do, and then they think, well, I'll go off and do extra work and make some money, and they justify it in that way.
Christopher, I've heard you say this.
Yeah. And now I'm saying you're hearing me say it again.
No, but my point would be that I think after the 70s that is actually not true. That may have been true, but I don't think that is true, that men are so less capable of dealing with children and that it's better that they go off and earn money. You know, maybe the mother could go and earn some money. Did that never occur to you?
I'm not having any woman of mine go to work.
You know you're going to get in trouble if you go down there.
No, I won't. No, they don't need to work. They can if they like, but they don't have to.
You are joking.
No, I'm not. No, I would expect
to
take care of them. They work if you want, but you don't have to.
You are the commander's son, aren't you?
Yes. I am, yes.
You really mean that?
Sure.
You don't think women should go and work?
Yeah, I said they're welcome to do that. I'm thrilled if they want to. If they don't want to, they don't have to.
Is this you being ironic? Is this your famous attachment to irony?
No. What's so difficult about it?
It's just wrong. It's just absolutely wrong.
No, they're called the gentle sex for a good reason. I want to see them. I want to see them coarsened in the coarsened in the labour market. No, not if they don't want to.
You're 61,
they shouldn't feel they
not
have to.
180.
No, that's not good. I'm here to look after them. But no one got
Christopher, I've given you every single chance to opt out of that last statement.
No. I mean, that's my view. I don't think a Mrs. Hitchens should have to work.
It's been lovely to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's very nice of you to invite me.
Please, a huge thank you to the sexist but charming Christopher Hitchens.
Thank you, Dan. That was ist, wasn't it?
Yeah. Ist.
You had to say ist. Thanks a lot.
Are you a Christian?
I'm not.
What are you?
I'm not a member of any church. I don't think that there's any supernatural guidance. And
here's the article, by the way.
I don't think my presence here is attributable to any form of divine intervention.
What did you make of the story?
I thought it was a sad little story.
Why?
Well, someone who's getting a bit old and a bit silly and perhaps lacking for attention, and who I would have thought it would have been content with being born once, which is all that, in fact, she's ever going to be. Or any of us are. We're only going to be born once. So all this born-again stuff just gets me down, gives me a pain.
Says in this article, I'm extremely impressed with the genuineness and the sincerity in her search for spirituality and wholeness. The Reverend Gerald Durley, pastor of the Providence Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta, where Miss Fonda has attended services, told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I think she's found a certain sense of peace among people who found peace with Christianity.
So hard to object to, isn't it? You know what I think what I don't like, well, there's a lot of it I don't like, as well as finding it totally intellectually and morally unconvincing, is that this is the form that they believe modesty should take. It's going around all the time about how you've found God and how God has a special purpose for you. And this is construed as humility. It seems to me the height of immodesty to say that you've been chosen in this way or selected, or that you could possibly know that you had been. It's arrogant and conceited. Mother Teresa, endlessly praised for work that most of the time she actually never did. I went to watch her very closely in Calcutta. you don't mind that she thinks that what Bengal and Calcutta mainly needs is a campaign, a clerical campaign, against birth control and family planning. Has anyone here ever been to Bengal and concluded that's what it really needs? That's what she was really campaigning for, in case you're worried. But never mind. She gives a wonderful impression of being a charitable person. So what Indians need is more missionaries to cure poverty, when everybody knows there's only one cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women, which means giving them some control over their reproduction. If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. Begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America. And that followed a whole series of preceding apologies, or apologies, I would say, of a kind, made by the late Pope John Paul, who, it troubles me not at all to say, was a very impressive and serious human being. It followed no less than 94, count them, public recognitions on his part of appalling crime and error and cruelty and stupidity and offences to the free intelligence. Joseph Ratzinger, the current Pope, considered by some, by Catholics, to be the Vicar of Christ on earth, says of Indians, of the Indians who were massacred in the course of conversion in Brazil, after the apology had been made to them, he said, nonetheless, it must be remembered that before we came to convert them, they were silently awaiting the arrival of the Church. I don't think that's a very genuine kind of apology to you. In his comment, one of the few he's made on the institutionalization of rape and torture and maltreatment of children in Catholic institutions, he has said, it's a very severe crisis which involves us, he said, in the following: in the need for applying to these victims the most loving pastoral care. Well, I'm sorry, they've already had that. And to say that this is the responsibility laid upon you by the horrific admission that you've already had to make is not accepting responsibility in any adult sense. When I say child abuse was institutional, how dare I say so? How can I prove it? How can I prove such a thing? Well, I'll ask His Grace, and I'll ask Anne Widdecombe. Where is Cardinal Bernard Law now? Where is he? Where is the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, whose resignation was indignantly demanded, finally, by 50 members of the Church and by the whole laity of Massachusetts, who also demanded his prosecution for the promotion and protection and covering up and apology for and defense of people whose crimes against children are too revolting to specify. And he's not in the jurisdiction of Massachusetts now, as perhaps you know. He's the Supreme Vicar of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, personally appointed by the Pope to that as well as many other important sinecures. And in 2005, this man, a fugitive from justice and from complicity in the filthiest crime that it's possible for a human being to imagine, was one of those voting in conclave to decide who the next Vicar of Christ on earth will be. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way. I say it in the presence of His Grace, and I say it to his face. The preachings of his church are responsible for the death and suffering and misery of millions of his brother and sister Africans, and he should apologize for it. He should show some shame. Fourth, for condemning my friend Stephen Fry for his nature, for saying you couldn't be a member of our church. You're born in sin. There's a revolting piece of casuistry that's sometimes offered on this point. Yeah, we hate the sin only. We love the sinner. Stephen is, I'm sorry to say, not quite like other girls. It's his nature. Actually, he is like other girls in that he's, when I last checked, absolutely boy mad. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman. It's obscene. And it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. I say that homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love, and it deserves our respect for that reason. That when my children were young, I'd have been proud to have Stephen as their babysitter, and I told them they were lucky. And if anyone came to my door as a babysitter wearing holy orders, I'd call first a cab and then the police. And it's your fault, sir and ma'am, it's your fault that that's true, and that everybody knows it's true. How you can live with it, I don't know. But to begin again to offer remission of sin, as Bishop Ratzinger, the Pope, I'll call him the Pope for heaven's sake, wants to do. If you come to a Catholic youth festival in Sydney, Australia, where I just was, you'll get a certain remission from purgatory or hell. It may be temporary. If you come a lot and you give a lot, you'll get possibly permanent remission from the eternal punishment that they don't know any more about than you and I do. This is the sale of indulgences blatantly, openly. It's the same temptation that was offered to those who set off on that Fourth Crusade that's just been apologized for, and killed all the Jews of Europe on their way, sacked Byzantine Christianity when they got to Constantinople, and then went on to massacre the Arabs and Muslims. They were offered paradise if they died committing these terrible crimes against humanity. But if you see what I mean, therefore, the stimulus to crime, the impetus to crime, the belief in certainty, the belief that a divine warrant entitles you to do whatever you like, is the sin that must be cancelled, that must be annealed, that must somehow be apologized for. Now, I don't wish any. That's perfect timing. I don't wish any ill on any fellow primate or mammal of mine, even if this primate or mammal claims to be a primate in possession of a secret that's denied to me. I can forgive even that, because I live in a country where their reign doesn't run, their writ doesn't apply, and they can't burn me and silence me and censor me any more than they can tell my wife that she can't use contraception, or any more than they can really tell Stephen that he's a beast. All I want to propose in closing is this: that if the human species is to rise to the full height that's demanded by its dignity and by its intelligence, we must, all of us, move to a state of affairs where that condition is permanent. And I think we should get on with it. Okay, thank you for having me. What about His Holiness the Pope saying until 1965, ladies and gentlemen, that every Jewish person was collectively guilty of deicide? Wasn't that said by the vicar of Christ on earth, the man who held the keys of Peter, who had divine authority? By what right, Rabbi, do you say that you know God better than they do? That your God is better than theirs? That you have an access that I can't claim to have, to knowing not just that there is a God, but to knowing his mind? You put it modestly, but it is a fantastically arrogant claim that you make, an incredibly immodest claim, and if made by a fanatic, or by a bully, or by a murderer, I'll take it to the next stage and reply directly to Karamazov and Smerdyakov. Isn't it rather the case that with God anything is permissible? Once someone has said, God told me to do it, what is not allowed? What does Christianity say? Those laws can be suspended, and in your favor too, if you make the right prayers and propitiations and sacrifices. There can be, a virgin can conceive, a dead body can walk again, your leprosy can be cured, the blind can see. Nonsense. It's not moral to lie to children. It's not moral to lie to ignorant, uneducated people and to tell them that if they will only believe nonsense, they can be saved. It's immoral. Not until gentle Jesus, meek and mild, are you told, if you don't make the right propitiations, you can depart into everlasting fire. That one of the most wicked ideas ever preached, and one that's ruined the lives and the peace of mind of many, many children, preached to them by vicious, child-hating old men and women in the name of this ghastly cult which we're met here to discuss tonight. I don't need 2 minutes to finish with this religion, but thanks. The Bishop of Llandaff, in an argument with Thomas Paine, once said, well, when it says keep the women, as Paine had pointed out, he said, I'm sure God didn't mean just to keep them for immoral purposes. But what does the Bishop of Llandaff know about that? It says kill all the men, kill all the children, and keep the virgins. I think I know what they had in mind. I don't think it's moral teaching.
Even C.S. Lewis admits that everything that Jesus said is complete nonsense if it isn't uttered by somebody who believes the world is about to come to an end. Only in that sense does it make sense to say, take no thought for the morrow. Don't care about possessions. Don't care about progress or literacy or improvement or thrift or any of the things that make culture possible. There's no point. It'll all be over real soon. Well, this is why culture and religion are eventually incompatible. And so those of us who want transcendence of the kind Zachary mentions, or something awe-inspiring beyond ourselves, should look through the Hubble telescope and see how wonderful that is. Or read a page of Stephen Hawking and see what awe-inspiring things there are in the cosmos. And then see if you can turn away from that and be impressed by the burning bush.
So here's my question for you. Is it good that the Bible prohibits humans from having sex with animals? Or is that an example of dangerous sexual repression?
The allusion I was making was not to the man-made in the ordinary sense nature of religion, that you can tell from studying some of its codes that it's humans that are inventing it. That's why so many of the injunctions in the Old Testament are, as you quite rightly say, concerned with agriculture, shall we put it delicately. But it's more that it's men-made, that it's designed to keep women in subordination.
But could you answer the question? Do you think the Bible is right to prohibit humans from having sex with animals?
I don't know of any good advice about having sex with animals. In favor of it, I mean to say, look, there are things that if people do, incest is one, and cannibalism is another. If you do them, you'll die out. A society that permitted it would. There were societies in New Guinea that did practice cannibalism, and there's a terrible disease that you get called kuru if you do it, and it seems to be. It's, if you like, there are some rules that are self-enforcing.
Being as it is what we know it to be, a loose plagiarism from Judaism, and along with Judaism, one of the other two religions plagiarized in turn, that's given us all the blessings of Islam. So it's part of man-made religiosity that trades under the brand name of monotheism, and the problem that all three have in common is that of faith. Faith, in other words, that a man-made religion can actually keep a promise of salvation, not just in this life and the next. And second, the belief that faith is in itself a virtue, transcending reason and dispensing, conveniently enough, with the need for evidence. Why is it incompatible with knowledge and science? It's for this reason. We calculate that the human species, Homo sapiens, has been around now. Carl Sagan thought perhaps 200,000 years. I would say 100,000. Not more, not less. In order to believe the Christian message, you have to believe this. For those 100,000 years, people were born, died, usually, many of them, in childbirth, either the mother or the child. Life expectancy, perhaps 20 years, 25. Died of microorganisms they didn't know existed. Genesis doesn't mention them because the people who write Genesis don't know there are microorganisms. Earthquakes would have been terrifying. Tsunamis, volcanoes, mysterious events. War and famine superimposed on this. You can all fill out this picture for yourselves, I'm sure. That was our life. For tens of thousands of years, on and on it went. Maybe a gradual upward curve of a sort. We seem to have made some progress, very painfully, and with infinite suffering and labor, and with our solidarity still intact. Now here's what you have to believe. You have to believe that heaven watched that for 98,000 years. And after 98,000 years decided 2,000 years, it may be time to intervene. And the best way of doing that would be to have a filthy human sacrifice in a very remote part of Palestine. And the news of this has still not penetrated to the rest of the world, and I don't think will be believed when it does, and isn't believed by me, and can't be believed by a thinking person. Thank you.
as I've said, I think that all religions are wrong in the same way, in that they privilege faith over reason, but they're not all equally bad in the same way all the time. I mean, if I'd been writing in the 1930s, I would certainly have said that the Roman Catholic Church was the most dangerous religion in the world because of its open alliance with fascism and anti-Semitism, which the damage from that our culture has never recovered from and never will. But at the moment, it's very clear to me that the most toxic form that religion takes is the Islamic form. The horrible idea of wanting to end up with Sharia, with a religion-governed state, a state of religious law, and that the best means of getting there is jihad, holy war, and that Muslims have a special right to feel aggrieved enough to demand this, I think is absolute obscene wickedness, and I think their religion is nonsense. And in its entirety. The idea of God speaks to some illiterate merchant warlord in Arabia, and he's able to write this down perfectly, and it contains the answers to all human. Don't waste my time. It's bullshit.
But you're saying the same about
also that God speaks. The Archangel Gabriel speaks only Arabic, it seems.
I just want to say, in retrospect, you were very civil, actually. I don't know what I was thinking.
Is this the same characterization of all religions?
Well, actually, no, because remember, Islam makes one special claim for itself. All religions claim to be revealed truth. They all are founded by divine revelation. But Islam rather dangerously says, ours is the last and final one. There can't be any more after this. This is God's last word. Now, that's straight away a temptation to violence and intolerance, and if you note, it's a temptation they seem quite willing to fall for. We are forced yet again, as we are all the time, to confront the fact that faith by itself doesn't deserve respect, as we keep saying it does, that faith on its own is another form of fanaticism or substitution of belief for reason, and that's a sign of what a poorly evolved primate, mammalian species we are. Now, we're lucky that there were people on one of those planes who didn't pray at all. They got out of their seats and they said, we're not going to let this plane fly into the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. But it's not all bad news, because it does mean that those who crash planes full of living people into buildings full of living people, shouting that God is great and believing it's going to get them to paradise, aren't going to get there. One is only sorry. One is only sorry, and very sorry in my case, that there's no moment, at the moment of their extinction, there's no moment when they think, damn, it isn't. But wishful thinking can't help that either. So my settled verdict on this is, they want to die, and I'm here to help them do so. And so should you be, and everyone in this room should be ashamed until they've done something to kill at least one jihadist or bring about the physical and moral and political and military defeat and humiliation of these people. And the God in which they believe, and the non-existent deity in which they dare to take permission to try and kill us all.
Christopher, have you ever prayed?
Once for a hard-on.
Loyola says we sacrifice the intellect to God. Again, why am I supposed to respect these appalling sayings? But, I mean, every year on the Feast of Eid, which is roughly the same, the Muslim version, well, it's exactly the same story, but it's celebrated with even more fanaticism. People kill a sheep in praise of Abraham's willingness to conduct a human sacrifice on his son. They think that's the most wonderful moral story they can think of. Now, here's where I part company. I don't think that someone's willingness to slaughter his son because he's hearing voices in his head is a great example of moral suasion. And maybe there's something I'm missing here. But I have a terrible feeling that those who do think that that surrender, that willingness to commit murder, to commit infanticide, under a psychopathic delusion is a sign of virtue. And if that was not the case, I would not have had to write a book showing that religion is a root of evil, which it is, as I've just demonstrated.
Thank you. One of the pleasures of heaven, because it's always been rather hard to describe them, you ever noticed that? Eating foie gras to the sound of trumpets was the Reverend Sidney Smith's best shot. We know what the Muslims think for men. Apparently for women, do you know what they get? They get their husbands back.
Is that heaven?
Nothing man-made about that, right?
What happened to the word Christendom? Remember, there used to be such a term. It used to extend across the world, and the hope is that it would extend even further. And it was unironically used to mean those areas of human civilization, and areas yet to be civilized, of course, where the word of Jesus Christ reigned or would reign. And it's all gone. The word is never used except historically or sarcastically now. And McCulloch doesn't say it ended because of the Crusades, though he could. It didn't. Crusades didn't kill it. Not because of slavery, mandated by Christianity. That didn't kill it either. Nor the mass murder of colonial subjects in the yet-to-be-Christianized world. That wasn't sufficient. It didn't really end, he said, till 1914, when all the Christian empires of the world, Austria-Hungary, Germany, France, Britain, France is a slight exception to this, but only a slight one, and Russia, all of them commanded by Christian emperors, and calling upon their subjects as Christians, went to war with each other and very nearly destroyed the whole human civilization, and certainly reduced it to a point where we can't guess where we might be if it hadn't been for this extraordinary outbreak of barbarism. And out of that came the terrors of fascism and of Stalinism, of which it was the seedbed as well. I mention this partly because I want to maintain that there's no such thing as a religion of peace by definition. And second, to point out, and that its best historian has to admit something that if I was a Christian would make me humiliated. But because there was another empire involved in that war, the Ottoman Empire, which also came to an end, its other name was the Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate. It went to war on the side of German and Austrian imperialism and Hungarian imperialism, and it lost not just the war, having proclaimed a worldwide jihad against Christianity, except for German and Austrian and Hungarian Christianity, which were its allies. And it didn't just lose the war, but by 1924 had been dissolved by the Turkish leadership, by Ataturk. It lost the Caliphate. And that's the only one that still has supporters. The other Christian and religious empires have all gone. But the Caliphate still has fans, not just in the Muslim world, sometimes referred to by Muslims as the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, but also in what some Muslims call the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, the part of the world that isn't yet Muslim. There are Caliphate clubs in London now and Berlin and elsewhere, quite important ones. And what I want to know is why that is and what we should think about it. Believers in this fantasy have, Laurie's spared me the need to say much of this, have committed extraordinary atrocities in Istanbul, in Madrid, in India, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and of course in our own fair city. And the pretexts for it vary. They can be, the excuse for the mass murder can be that Australia has helped East Timor become independent from Indonesia. They can be that Newsweek has printed a false story about the desecration of a supposedly holy book. You never know what it's going to be next. But everyone knows to be careful about it, and everyone understands that the threat of violence that backs it is believable. And that's my opening position. Now you will say, I can hear it already being said, you may be saying it already to yourselves because the defense mechanisms kick in. And in any case, Laurie already said it for you. And I hope Professor Ramadan won't feel the need to say it again. But if he does, fair enough. You may say, that's not the real Islam. Those aren't real Muslims. Now, isn't that a fascinating objection? Is there anyone in this room, I exempt Professor Ramadan because it's his turn to speak next. Is there anyone in this room who would care to arbitrate that question? Who is to say
Where is the authority that defines who is a true son of the prophet or true interpreter of his work? Part of the problem to begin with, and it's part of the problem because it is a religion, is that it's perfectly true to say we don't know who the true Muslims are. How right that is, who does speak for it. Only the second problem with defining Islam as peaceful, only the second problem with defining it as peaceful has to do with the fact that it's highly fissile and highly schismatic, that there is a civil war going on within it, the religion of peace, as we speak. At least one civil war between the votaries of this religion of peace is already taking place, and some of it is exported outside that world into ours. Very salient fact. The first reason, though, is this. Islam makes very large claims for itself. Very large claims indeed. It claims to be the last and final religion, the last and final revelation. When you see bumper stickers, everyone says you can't reduce major things to a bumper sticker. It's not my idea to have bumper stickers saying Islam is the solution. It's a well-known slogan, actually, of parties associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. They say Islam is the solution for everything. It takes care of all your life and the one to come. Sexuality, political economy, banking, diet, relations with other religions, everything. It's a total solution. What is creepy about the word total? I hope I don't have to tell an audience like this. It's the first 5 letters of the word totalitarian. It's absolute. It's absolute. It's all-inclusive. It's unanswerable. And oddly, for a religion that makes such large claims, notice another thing about Islam, it doesn't particularly like having these claims questioned or scrutinized. In other words, just as there is with all religions an inverse relationship between the claims they make and the evidence they can produce for them, you must have noticed that, with Islam, a younger religion, and perhaps therefore more in its first flush, there's an extraordinarily strong willingness to say that any challenge to its absolutist claims is by definition profane. And profanity and blasphemy can be the antecedent to very severe punishment, and often are, for Muslims and for non-Muslims. And this is not a road of peace, in my submission. Thus my first point completed. The claim to govern everything from hygiene to sex and the afterlife, which contains detailed prescriptions for the good and bad versions of itself, again strikes me as somewhat totalitarian, and they're both based upon two very, very questionable and not very peaceful concepts. One is the idea of a perfect human being, the Prophet Muhammad, and the other is the idea of a perfect book, the Quran, the recitation. Now, the category perfect human primate or mammal and the category flawless book that could possibly not use any kind of change, revision, or editing are categories that do not exist. There are no members of these categories. Therefore, any challenge to this faith is bound to lead to heresy and to schism, and does. And just as all forms of absolutism and totalitarianism, leader worship and revealed truth, unalterable text, always do, because they can break, perhaps, but they cannot bend. And thus the latent potential of violence between them, among them, as well as within them, is very great. And at any moment, someone is in danger of being accused of being an apostate or an unbeliever.
I address you as an atheist and a secularist and a Marxist. I'm very much troubled by your remarks about the need to stand up and fight this Muslim jihad. I have no time for oppressive religion of any stripe, but I think you are well aware of the long history of crimes committed by the British government in Iraq, the United States government in Vietnam, and today in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm wondering how you can possibly say that It is Western civilization, the civilization of the colonizers and the oppressors, who do it all, of course, in the name of liberation and democracy. How this is not the fundamental problem, rather than what you call the jihad of what I consider to be the response to the crimes of U.S. and European imperialism.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. You see how far the termites have spread and how long and well they've dined. When someone can get up and say that in a meeting of unbelievers, that the problem is Western civilization, not the Islamic threat to it. That's how far the termites have got. Now, as a matter of fact, sir, I could have asked that question 50 times better than you did and answered it 50 times as comprehensively. If you like, I can, without conceit, refer you to a biography of mine of Henry Kissinger. That is a compendium and anthology of the war crimes committed by the United States and its allies in the Third World and elsewhere, and a call for those people, those responsible, to be arraigned for crimes against humanity and war crimes. One of those crimes was the arming and training of the Indonesian armed forces to take over the Republic of East Timor. Some of you are no doubt aware of this terrible atrocity. It's one of Noam Chomsky's best campaigns in writing, leading to the very near physical extirpation of the people of East Timor. A genocide more comprehensive than Cambodia, taking place a little afterwards, with our weapons, with our diplomatic protection, and with the endorsement of Kissinger and Ford. Now, what are some of the items of the Al-Qaida bin Laden Manifesto? Well, oddly enough, and this was to my surprise, I thought it would be lower down. Item 3 in the charge against the West is that it reversed course on East Timor, tried to undo the genocide, brought East Timor to a referendum on independence, sent Jose Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest, Sergio Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest UN civil servants, to East Timor to supervise the transition to independence and the election, and made East Timor the newest member of the UN. Bin Laden says, "For this we will never forgive the Christian crusaders and their imperialist friends. They took away a republic from a Muslim land, Indonesia." Most of the people of East Timor, by the way, are Christian and speak Portuguese. A detail. For this, we will never forgive them. For this, that was the reason they gave for blowing up the UN office in Iraq, because that's where Melio was sent next, with a truck bomb of explosives so enormous that it must have been borrowed from the former Iraqi army and Ba'ath Party. That's the reason they gave for blowing up the Australian tourists in Bali, in Indonesia, and the Indonesian taxi drivers who were servicing that resort, because they couldn't forgive the West for its behavior in East Timor. In other words, if you want to avoid upsetting these people, you have to let Indonesia commit genocide in East Timor. Otherwise, they'll be upset with you. You'll have made an enemy. If you tell them they can't throw acid in the faces of unveiled women in Karachi, they will be annoyed with you. If you say, we insist, we think that cartoonists in Copenhagen can print satire on the Prophet Muhammad, you've just made an enemy. You've brought it on. You're encouraging it to happen. So unless you're willing to commit suicide for yourself and for this culture, get used to the compromises you'll have to make and the eventual capitulation that will come to you. But bloody well don't do that in my name, because I'm not doing it. You surrender in your own name, leave me out of it. I'm going to fight these people and every other theocrat all the way. All the way. For free expression, for women's rights, for self-determination of small peoples, for the right of Iraqis to federate and have their own show, for the right of the Lebanese not to be bullied by Hezbollah and to have a multicultural democracy. Yes, I'll fight for this, and I think that the 82nd Airborne is brave to be fighting for it too. And I think you should be ashamed sneering at people who guard you while you sleep. Thanks.
Look, you've had your hand up for a while. I'm going to take your question. Lady in the front there.
Look, my one question is basically, or my one comment, or passing comment, is that so many times you've brought up women in Islam. I'd just like to correct that I've read the Quran, and all Muslim scholars would agree with me that Islam gives women a lot of rights. We over and over give Islam, women in Islam through the Quran, I may not say it through individuals who preach the religion, but Islam through the Quran gives women a lot of rights, and I need that to be heard. I need that to everyone to understand and hear that. I mean, I am a young Muslim woman myself. I sit before you, I have a voice, and I can speak to you, and I can look you in the eye, and I do have my rights. And when I go to Iran, I'm actually Iranian as well, so when I go to Iran, I also have my rights. I need it to be heard that the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us our rights. People, individuals in countries, and people who represent our religion may not, and they may do the wrong thing to sort of stand in front and show us religion and preach us religion, but Islam does.
All right, we're going to take that as a comment, a very passionate one at that. Okay.
Well, no. No, we're not. No, we're not going to take it as a comment. I can see your face, I can see your hair, and I can see you sitting in an audience with young gentlemen. Don't you tell me you can do any of that in Iran.
I can, though.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you cannot.
I can. In Iran, in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where I have been, my hair would be out. My hair would be out because my veil would be little. My hair would be, it may be covered a little bit, but just like in the Bible, in the letter to the Corinthians, it says to cover your head, to be modest.
It's a shame she spoiled what could have been a perfectly good statement.
All right, okay, I'm sorry.
But my modesty would be there. I mean, you've been talking about these cheap jokes and things throughout this whole conversation, but you're the only one making the cheap comments.
You insult your sisters in Tehran who are being beaten,
and
raped every day when you say that they have their rights in the Islamic Republic. It's an insult to the women of Iran.
I do not. Astaghfirullah.
Okay. You want a regime like that to have nuclear weapons? You're welcome. But you should say that's what you don't mind. Are you going to say that? Are you going to say you've no objection? That the real problem is the Jewish state? Come on, be serious.
So the Jewish state doesn't have nuclear weapons? Is that what you're saying?
Well, now, I appeal again to the fair-mindedness and intelligence of the audience. Did I say that?
No, but
did I in any way imply it?
No, but...
No. Did I not begin with a throat clearing, which I'll amplify if you will, about my long record of work about this, my defense of the Israeli dissidents who published the news about Israel's illegal program and gone to jail for it. I can refer you to all that if you like. But my point was directed specifically to you. Yeah. I said, does this, in your mind, make the destruction of human rights in Islamic countries okay or not?
No.
Good.
Okay, let's hear from Walid.
Well, that's progress of the kind. The United Nations non-binding, so far non-binding resolution, which has carried now for 3 years and was carried again this week, sponsored by Pakistan, a country for which we pay. It isn't really even a country, barely even a state. It's a construct of Muslim partitionism carved out of the body of India. It wants to tell us what we can say and what we can think in our own country. And it says that we mustn't ever use the word Islam in any sentence that includes the words violation of human rights, for example. Now this is in the week when the government of Pakistan has handed over to the Taliban its most fertile valley, this valley of Swat, 100 miles from the capital, Islamabad, and said, you can run this valley, militarily and legally. You can have Sharia law, and you are the police and the enforcers of it. And you can close all the girls' schools. But we can't say that your religion is anything to do with the violation of human rights. It's preposterous. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can. And if you wonder what will happen if you don't, look and see how a cricket team in Middlesex in England had to change its name by force last week, because it was called, and had been for years, the Middlesex Crusaders. Look and see how stories about little pigs can't be taught to children in English schools anymore, lest offense be taken by the religion of peace.
If I'm reading the Quran, I certainly say, well, I can't tell whether this book
is the Word of God or not. I can only doubt that there is such a thing. But I can hope that this was a bad day for God. Can't I? And I can hope to live in a country where I can say that and get applause. Yes, and even mirth. And don't think that it isn't a precious thing, and don't think it's being compromised. I'm coming to that. I don't like the idea of a paradise reward for martyrs. Don't like it. It's not me somehow. Don't like the account. Don't like the early accounts of village squabbles with the local Jews who've taken a look at the new claimant to be the Messiah and decided about him what they decided about the previous claimant. He's no good. He's not up to snuff. Do you think the Jews are ever going to be forgiven for that, by the way? For rejecting 2 in a row? I don't think so. And I don't see why they should hope for forgiveness either. And still I'm allowed to stand here and say this, and there are many parts of Europe I couldn't do that anymore, or I'd have to be very careful in who I'd invited for the audience. I couldn't do it easily on the air, couldn't do it easily in print, couldn't do it easily in public, couldn't do it on certain campuses, couldn't do it with certain publishing houses. Now, all of this has been done to us by the wrong Muslims. Well, let's get together then, isolate who these wrong Muslims are, who've imposed a culture of violence-backed censorship upon us, and let's get rid of them and have an honest discussion about the text and the reader. And I think the ball is in your court, Professor, on that. Just to stay with my own profession, the thing I know best. Not one major media outlet, print or broadcast, has yet shown you what the Danish cartoons actually look like. Yale University Press, which commissioned a book on them which was to include the cartoons, as how could it not, eventually panicked. Yale University Press panicked and published the book without the cartoons over the objections of its author. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. The President of the United States and the head of the Joint Chiefs a few days ago were so pulverized with fear that they had to address personally in pleading tones a Christian nutbag in Florida who might have been or might not have been about to commit a minor act of blasphemy. Is this the culture that Islam wants us to have in relation to it? One of, if you like, preemptive submission, preemptive cowering, backed by the fear of force? Because that is not multiculturalism. That's nothing like the gorgeous mosaic. That's actually the absolute negation of what a multicultural system would be like. And a multicultural system has to look rather askance, I think, on a religion whose preachers and websites openly make threats against people like myself, against the Jewish people, against the Hindus, who, for heaven's sake, aren't even monotheists, can be killed on almost any pretext, against, and a very important point, and I have to make it, and against the wrong kind of Muslim. Now, Professor, I'll say this as mildly as I can, you may not be aware that you were, and I don't want to increase the area of unexpected offense-taking that's been so hugely broadened by the sensitivities of a religion that has the answer to everything. But I'll just say I don't greatly care to be told, as if I didn't know, that an Iraqi life is as precious as an American one. And as someone who's visited Iraq quite a lot, had the occasion to think about it a good deal, I wonder if you could mention anything the United States has done in Iraq that is remotely as criminal, as sadistic and as violent as the blowing up of the Mosque of the Golden Dome in Samarra. One of the holiest sites in the Muslim world, callously blown up by Sunni forces in alliance with forces who, perhaps I'd agree with them for once on this, were fascistic Baathists. Probably they got the weapons and the high explosive from them. That makes it worse, surely. Intending to start, and successfully, in fact, initiating a civil war in which countless thousands of people have been killed, religious processions have been just fired upon, funerals have been fired upon, Qurans without number, of course, been incinerated, much more importantly, children, old people, and civilians. Now, where is, I just wonder, you must be able to quote it to me. Where is the Sunni fatwa against this conduct? Where is it? Where is the authoritative statement of moral outrage in the Sunni world saying this is not acceptable behavior for followers of the Prophet? I missed it. And so apparently did the followers of the Prophet miss it, because they keep on doing this all the time. They were doing it before the United States got to Iraq, and they'll be doing it after we've gone. So I'm sorry I won't be talked to in that tone of voice.
Here, this gentleman.
Well, thank you all very much for a very profound dialogue about what I see to be about tyranny versus human freedom in the mind and the spirit. So, but
we know who made his points, huh?
But both a man of faith and a man not of faith have completely slurped up the new civic myth and religion, which we identified as GWAT, the Global War on Terror. So let's look at the myth. You right?
Is there a question?
Yes.
Please?
So this,
okay. Question. Quickly.
Being that anyone with moral and intellectual fortitude who looks at the evidence of that day sees that no Al-Qaida jihadi had the means to schedule the war games that actually stood down
Hold it right there.
No. Yeah, that's not right.
Being that any
wasting your time.
Being that any member of Al-Qaida had no motive to anthrax the leading opponents of the Patriot Act.
Wasting your time. I'm not going to answer you.
Why won't you answer?
You can speak.
So here's the question.
You can
Being
speak.
that you are an intellectual, and now that
you can speak. I'm not bothering with you. I have no time to waste on people like you. Stop it. I can't make you stop. I can't make you stop. But when you stop, it's all over. Okay?
Are you going to answer me?
No, sir, I'm not.
So you believe it? Do you believe?
No, sir, I am not. No. Or am I going to buy? I'm not going to buy a pencil from your cup either. No, I'm not. That's correct.
Way in the back there, the gentleman way in the back. Thank you.
Good evening.
That was a big wow from a small mind. Forget it. I have no time to waste on people like you.
Very.
What kind of person am I?
Don't.
He's insulting me. He's insulting me. I can't respond to him.
No, leave him alone. Leave him alone as long as he stays quiet. He had his turn. You heard his question. I'm not wasting my time on him. Next. For you to say of Nazism that it was the implementation of the work of Charles Darwin is a filthy slander, undeserving of you, and an insult to this audience. If it's an atheistic regime, then how come that in the first chapter of Mein Kampf, Hitler says he's doing God's work and executing God's will in destroying the Jewish people? How come the Führer oath that every officer of the party and the army had to take, making Hitler into a minor god, begins, I swear in the name of Almighty God, my loyalty to the Führer? How come that on the belt buckle of every Nazi soldier it says Gott mit uns, God on our side? How come that the first treaty made by the National Socialist dictatorship, the very first, is with the Vatican? Therefore, we might begin by asking, and I'm asking my opponent as well as you when you consider your voting, is it good for the world to appeal to our credulity and not to our skepticism? Is it good for the world to worship a deity that takes sides in wars and human affairs? To appeal to our fear and to our guilt, is it good for the world? To our terror of death, is it good to appeal? To preach guilt and shame about the sexual act and the sexual relationship, is this good for the world? And asking yourself the while, are these really religious responsibilities, as I maintain they are? To terrify children with the image of hell and eternal punishment, not just of themselves, but of their parents and those they love. Perhaps worst of all, to consider women an inferior creation. Is that good for the world? And can you name me a religion that has not done that? To insist that we are created and not evolved in the face of all the evidence. Religion forces nice people to do unkind things, and also makes intelligent people say stupid things. handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord? No. It is very self-evident in our material world. Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship, a kind of divine North Korea. Greedy for uncritical praise from dawn till dusk, and swift to punish the original sins with which it so tenderly gifted us in the very first place. However, let no one say there's no cure. Salvation is offered. Redemption, indeed, is promised at the low price of the surrender of your critical faculties. Religion, it might be said, must be said, would have to admit, makes extraordinary claims, but though I would maintain that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, rather daringly provides not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary supernatural claims. What the cure for poverty really is, it eluded people for a long, long time. The cure for poverty has a name, in fact. It's called the empowerment of women. Try it in Bangladesh, try it in Bolivia. It works all the time. Name me one religion that stands for that, or ever has. Wherever you look in the world and you try to remove the shackles of ignorance and disease and stupidity from women, it is invariably the clerisy that stands in the way. Or in the case of... Now, furthermore, if you're going to grant this to Catholic charities, say, which I would hope are doing a lot of work in Africa, if I was a member of a church that had preached that AIDS was not as bad as condoms, I'd be putting some conscience money into Africa too, I must say. But it won't bring... I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be funny. If I was trying to be funny, you mistook me. It won't bring back the millions of people who've died wretched deaths because of that teaching. That still goes on. I'd like to hear a word of apology from the religious about that, if it was on offer. Do we grant to Hamas and to Hezbollah, both of whom will tell you and incessantly do, look at our charitable work. Without us, Effendi, the poor of Gaza, the poor of Lebanon, where would they be but for our... And they're right. They do a great deal of charitable work. It's nothing compared to the harm that they do, but it's a great deal of work all the same. We don't require divine permission to know right from wrong. We don't need tablets administered to us 10 at a time in tablet form, on pain of death, to be able to have a moral argument. No, we have... We have the reasoning and the moral suasion of Socrates and of our own abilities. We don't need dictatorship. I'm intrigued now. So religion could be a good thing after all. Sometimes we think. It's now the proposition. What would a religion have to do to get that far? Well, I think it would have to give up all supernatural claims. It would have to say... Please. It would have to say, no, you are not to do this under the threat of reward, heaven, or the terror of punishment, hell. No, we can't offer you miracles. Find me the church that will say, forget all that. Faith healing, no. It would have to give that up. It would have to give up the idea of an eternal, unalterable authority figure who was judge, jury, and executioner against whom there could be no appeal, and who wasn't finished with you even when you died. That's quite a lot for religion to give up, don't you think? But who would not say it would be better off without it, if it was what Tony Blair would like it to be? An aspect of humanism, an aspect of compassion, an aspect of the realizations of human solidarity, the knowledge that we are in fact all bound up one with another, that we have responsibilities to one to another, and that, as I do when I give blood, partly because I don't lose the pint forever, I can always get it back, but that there's actually a sense of pleasure to be had in helping your fellow creature. I think that should be enough. Thank you.